James Anthony Sullivan was born August 13th, 1940, with a family background from Nebraska. He was a second-generation Irish-American and seventh son of a Nebraskan farmer. His parents brought the family west during the Dust Bowl to work in the naval complex on San Diego's North Island. Jim grew up in Linda Vista, where he eventually met his wife Barbara in junior high. She stated, "He was a handsome devil, 6'3", coal black hair, and brown eyes. In high school, he was the quarterback of the football team, and I was the homecoming queen. We started going steady in 1956 when we were juniors and got married in 1960. By the mid-60s, he was performing around town in the band The Survivors with his sister-in-law Kathy on lead vocals. In 1968, with both families supportive, Jim and Barbara moved to Los Angeles, where she eventually got a job at Capitol Records. She stated that she moved more during that period of time than any other time in her life. Barbara worked while Jim played gigs in the area. Somewhere before moving, they had a son together. Jim was noted for having a core of about 10 to 20 people that would show up no matter where he played. He had small breaks in certain areas, like on a variety show and a small part in the movie Easy Rider. Eventually, Jim and his wife Barbara had a daughter together, and there was rising pressure for him to make it. Even though he had a popular live following, the 2 albums he released in the meantime did not do well. Some people attribute this to there being so much brass on the albums. With the perceived failure of his albums, he turned to drinking. Some felt like he was unhappy in his life and that success wasn't going to happen for him. In early 1975, the Sullivans' marriage was failing, and Jim's wife Barbara moved back to San Diego with their 2 kids. Still wanting to pursue his dream and going on one last hope, Jim decided to go to Nashville, Tennessee. His plans were to meet up with his sister-in-law again and create music there, since her husband at the time was a session guitarist. Jim O'Keefe, a friend of Jim Sullivan's, was the last to see him before he drove away. O'Keefe stated, music was his life. He was too old to do anything else, and he recognized that the LA way didn't fit him. So he was like, I'm going to take everyone's advice and go to Nashville. Sullivan packed up his car and with $125 in his account, $595 in 2019, went on his way. Jim would call his wife while going along the way, telling her how far he had gotten. On March 5th, Jim called Barbara from a payphone in Santa Rosa, New Mexico, then vanished. March 11th, Barbara is quoted as saying, I turned to my mother and said, I have the strangest feeling I'm never going to see Jim again. A few days later, a sheriff called one of Jim's brothers and said that they had found Jim's car abandoned. Apparently, Jim was stopped by the New Mexico Highway Patrol. It is unsure if he was ticketed or not, but Jim's friend O'Keefe said that Jim was a big, tall guy with a ponytail, and he probably had some leather on, and he wasn't one to hold his tongue too often. After all, we're talking about New Mexico, where you can take anything out into the desert and within minutes, it's gone. Barbara stated that when he disappeared, she thought that he finally made it. Jim had been driving for 15 hours and encompassed over 900 miles once he made it to Santa Rosa. The police initially pulled him over for swerving and gave him a sobriety test, which he passed. Chris Sullivan, which is Jim's son, recalled his family members going to New Mexico to find any sort of information, but ultimately coming back empty-handed. They were told by the sheriff that Jim had checked into La Mesa Motel, went to the liquor store, and bought a bottle of vodka, then took off in his car. Police reports later stated that his motel room was not slept in, and the key was found locked inside the room. There were reports that the key was the only item locked in the room, and that the guitar was also in the room. Jim later ended up on the property of the Ganettis, a family that's been rumored to have ties to the Chicago crime family. The ranch was about 26 miles southeast from the motel. Apparently, he had the lights on in his VW, which the family could see over 10 miles away in their ranch house. Mrs. Gannetti had two of her ranch hands drive down with her to find him, and when they got to his car, she asked Jim if he had a problem. Jim is quoted as saying, "No, do you?" And she replied, "Yes, you're on my property." From there, it's unknown what happened. There are also reports that Jim went to the property looking for help, but Miss Gannetti didn't understand him as she only spoke Italian, and he walked off. Jim's brother Jerry went back to Santa Rosa a few times, and the last time he was there, the sheriff had resigned. The clerk at the motel joined the service, and the Gannettis sold the ranch and moved to Hawaii. The police recovered the following items from Jim's car: his 12-string gilded guitar, a cassette player and several tapes, his address book and appointment calendar, reel-to-reel studio tapes, copies of his unemployment, a camel-colored suede jacket, and a box of several copies of his second album. When police found Jim's car, the doors were locked and the engine was dead. A man named Sammy Chavez said that he had driven by the car after the event happened and stated that it was odd how it was left on the road. Driving past the car hours later after work, all the doors were open. Jim left behind his guitar, which his friends took as a bad sign. As O'Keefe said, if something normal happened, he would have taken his guitar because he could sit down on any street corner and play a few songs and make $3 or $4. Another friend, Hughart, speculates that perhaps Jim wandered somewhere he shouldn't have, such as a military testing ground. A local newspaper from 1975 wrote an article with the headline, "Possibly Sullivan?" where a badly decomposed body was found 8 miles west of Las Cruces. It should be noted that Las Cruces is 245 miles south of Santa Rosa. The body was dead for less than a month, and it was between the ages of 30 and 40 years old. At the time, Sullivan would have been 35. The body was 6'2", and Sullivan was reported as being between 6'2" and 6'3", and it had a tattoo on his right forearm, had a mustache, and a short beard. Later on, another article was posted stating that the body was not Sullivan's, though there weren't any reports online as to whose body it was. Interestingly, there's a thread on crimewatcher.net that brings up the possibility of Jim being Mesquite Doe. Though it's eventually concluded that it's not possible. Mesquite Doe died in about Dallas, Texas in 1977. It is pointed out that Jim was never recorded into the Name Us or Doe Network website, which has never been listed as a missing person through all these years. In order for Jim Sullivan to be entered in the Name Us website, a family member of his would have to file a missing persons report. On the YouTube channel Lord and Arts, he talks about this, where one of his viewers tried to enter Sullivan on the site and even talked to law enforcement about this. Neither Santa Rosa nor the Guadalupe County Sheriff's Office have missing person cases, and the New Mexico State Police stated that Jim Sullivan was never listed as a missing person. In my personal opinion, I do think that Jim Sullivan was murdered by the Gannettis. There is just too much that has been unexplained about his disappearance, and interestingly how their family sold their ranch and moved to a completely other part of the world. The police sheriff, not chief, resigned, and then somebody from the motel ended up joining the force. It just sounds really suspicious to me, honestly. I think that on top of that, with his family constantly going back to find out anything at all about his disappearance, that might be a reason also why the Gannetti family sold their estate or their ranch to go to Hawaii. Of course, there's no proof whatsoever as to anybody who could have killed him, but at the same time too, I feel like in 2019, he probably would be dead either way, because he was born in 1940. So he would almost be 79 by now. Not to say people don't live that long, but to just be, gone for about 45 years and no one's ever heard of you, I do think it's suspicious. I think by now he would be dead either way. But my conclusion